Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for talking to us. It's been quite a different time. How are you doing, first of all?
Very well here in self-isolation in the greater Washington area.
So, Ambassador, what do you think is the future of the bilateral relationship between Mexico and the United States? What are the new challenges from your point of view?
Well, first, I think it's important to remember that this relationship is more important than ever. The two economies are still very much integrated. And that's a good side. On the bad side, the illicit commerce, the trafficking in drugs, the cross-border crime is as dangerous as ever. The challenges of migration remain serious. And maybe I would say the one area that remains important, but where we haven't given much attention, is the people-to-people relationship between Mexicans and citizens of the United States, which you would see in cultural exchanges, educational exchanges. That has not gotten much attention. It's just as important, but the other parts of this relationship remain as vital as ever. And so I think that everybody has to keep working really hard to keep this relationship on track. We're coming up to launching USMCA, the new version of NAFTA. I think that's very important, and it's going to be even more important as both economies, and Canada too, try to emerge from this pandemic and all the economic damage that has caused.
What do you think is the perception of the new Mexican government and the way President López Obrador is handling the situation?
Well, I think first it's important to say there was a lot of hope when López Obrador came to power in Mexico. A lot of people looking forward to some improvements in some areas, and then some questions also about how he would handle the economy, how he would handle relations with the US administration. I think right now, probably people in both countries are asking questions about how well their governments are handling this COVID-19 crisis. And in that sense, there's a little bit of a parallel between the two countries, with people watching what their presidents are doing very carefully, but also then seeing governors coming forward in both countries, performing in ways that are winning approval from their citizens in their states. There's no question that this is a really tough crisis, and I would say neither federal government has been perfect in managing this crisis, but it's an ongoing learning experience. And we see it in the economic area where there are impacts, as well as the health area.
You were saying a little bit ago that crime is worse than ever. What did you see in the challenges? Back in your time, you faced very heavy challenges in terms of international crime and drug trafficking, both Mexico and United States. What do you learn from that experience, and what do you think both countries have learned during this past 10 years, let's say?
I'd say we've learned that we have to keep trying to find better and better ways of working together in this. I'd say also we've learned that you're not going to solve this only by law enforcement, but you do have to have a strong law enforcement cooperation. And that means people have to trust each other. They have to learn together the best practices. And that's one of the big challenges, is learning together, trusting each other, maintaining that trust. The other is that you can't just deal with this on the supply side. You have to deal with the demand side also. There have to be programs in the United States that deal with trying to reduce the demand for the drugs. And that's a very important part of the process. At the same time, it's very hard to get control of a situation if you aren't being effective against these organized groups and against the violence that they cause, particularly in Mexico. And that's an area where it seems to me there are real questions about whether or not the efforts have been successful over the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And do you think President López Obrador should change his strategy to fight organized crime?
Well, I think all of us have to look at the data. And if you're not reducing homicides, if you're not reducing other kind of violence, you need to learn from those facts and start looking at different ways of doing that. And he has done that. As you know, he started off surprising everybody by setting up a National Guard, which seemed different from what he'd been saying before he came in. He recently has reaffirmed the importance of having the armed forces for the near term help out with other law enforcement officials. I think that the two sides of the border need to increase efforts to work together and restore trust on the law enforcement side. And I think it would make a lot of sense if we could to have a good dialogue about what are the non-law enforcement and justice steps that you could take to reduce demand and reduce the flows. So you have to do all of that, but that really demands that there be a lot of mutual trust. And it seems to me that we've been sort of stuck in one area now for a couple of years, that where people work together, they do work together well, but if we're going to be successful, we have to move up to a higher level of the ability actually to act against these organized groups in an effective way.
Mm-hmm. The current government is looking back into Fast and Furious, this very controversial operation. What do you think about that?
I think there were mistakes made in that operation. It was actually underway and finished before I arrived in Mexico. No question there were problems involved. It was the motivation of it, I think, was positive, which was to try to stop guns from flowing from the United States into Mexico. The implementation of that motivation was far from perfect. And there needs to be more work to stop guns from flowing from the US into Mexico. But I really don't see what the purpose of revisiting something that happened several years ago is right now. The challenge right now is to make sure you're doing your best possible to reduce any guns that may be coming into Mexico, and also to be doing the very best possible to reduce fentanyl and other dangerous drugs from flowing through Mexico into the United States. I mean, the purpose is to save lives now on both sides of the border. And what we've seen for statistics for the past several years is there are too many people dying on both sides of the border in the United States with drug overdoses, in Mexico with violent homicides. And that's where I think we should focus our efforts as federal governments.
Do you think there are political reasons, or is it a good distractor to go back and talk about Fast and Furious?
I think what I would say is the key point is to focus on now and going forward. Mm. That's my advice to both governments is let's get changes right now and improvements right now, because there are people alive right now that will not be alive unless we get better at fighting these organized crime groups, countering them and stopping the bad flows of bad things in both directions.
What do you think about the case against Genaro García Luna?
Well, I think we're going to see. I was surprised by when the charges were brought, in the sense that I did not know there was an investigation going on. I think that this is one of the big challenges in building trust. It's an example of it between the two governments. You need to have a way to have a secure vetting of people who are intimately involved in this cooperation. And that means at every level, from the top down to the bottom, because there is just too much pressure a lot of times on people, either the temptation to get money or the threat of having you, your children, your family members possibly killed or kidnapped from these organized groups. You've got to have a process that is really strong in validating people, and not just once. It has to be done on a regular basis. And it was one of the real challenges when I was involved to keep that, to one, establish a system where that would happen, and to then try to keep it going. And clearly it did not work perfectly.
Did you have any information that back then Genaro Garcia Luna was colluded with the top drug lords in Mexico?
What I can say is we noted that there was more focus on some groups, going after some groups than others, and that there were differing opinions between the parts of the Mexican government that were involved in fighting organized crime, because as you remember, there was the federal police, there was the Army, the Navy, and CSEN. And different of those actors at times seemed to be more vigorous going after different of the groups. Mm-hmm. But I never, certainly to any of my memory, I never have anything that actually pointed to, at that point, a connection between the head of the federal police and any of the organized groups.
Do you think Garcia Luna was soft on El Chapo's cartel?
Well, you know, I don't recall thinking that when I was ambassador. I do recall the problems that we had keeping El Chapo in prison once he was captured. There seemed to be a very powerful way to buy off certain people to get him out at different positions. And then there was a lot of difficulty, as you know, bringing people to trial and to justice, which there are a lot of reasons for that, including needs for improvement in Mexico's judicial system. And so we very much were trying, once somebody was arrested, we hoped they would be extradited to the United States, because we felt that our system would be more secure and would have a better chance of bringing them to justice. You know, it was just our honest opinion at that time. But we did work very closely with attorney generals during those years in Mexico, and they worked very hard during those, I'm talking about the Calderon years. They seemed quite dedicated to trying to bring people to justice. But there were a lot of problems in the system that existed in Mexico at that time.
Clearly. Do you think President Calderon knew about Garcia Luna's whereabouts and possible collusion with the drug cartels?
My sense is no, I don't think so. From my impression, President Calderon was consistently dedicated to countering, to fighting these organized groups and to try and bring them under control. I never had any thought any differently than that.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador, what do you think about, looking back, what was your best moment and what was your most difficult moment while you were U.S. Ambassador in Mexico?
Wow, that's pretty hard. Let's see. I could say my most enjoyable moments were doing things with young Mexicans. No question about that. Mexican students, high school, college students, graduate students, because you could see the excellence, the dedication, the energy, the drive to make Mexico better. And that was always so encouraging. And it was one of the reasons we tried hard to expand exchanges between the United States and Mexico, which has been very hard because there's not a lot of money for that. Mm-hmm. But, you know, that's the future of Mexico and the relations between the two countries. So that was by far, that set of experiences was my favorite experiences. There were a number of difficult experiences. I remember once when the New York Times wrote a story and said that I had vetoed a candidate to become the Secretary of Defense of Mexico at the beginning of the Peña Nieto administration, which was not true at all. And those were difficult moments of trying to figure out how to make it clear that that wasn't true, and to work with the government of Mexico. That was challenging. And there were other times when there were stories about the security cooperation between the two governments that were distorted and blown completely out of proportion. Those were tough moments. The other difficult time was when two members of the embassy staff were attacked by federal policemen in Morelos. In Morelos, yeah. That was a really tough period of time to figure out why this happened, and to bring those responsible, to have those responsible arrested.
There was always talking that García Luna was behind that attack, actually.
Well, that I don't know, but I do know that it was very hard to get the federal policeman responsible for it arrested and charged. It took a lot of hard work to get that done. It took, we had the support, we got the support of the president to do that, and we had the support of the attorney general at that time to do it. There was a resistance.
From García Luna?
Well, from somewhere in that SSP apparatus.
Well, whom else? Whom else was the man who was in charge of the whole thing? Was it a conversation? Was it García Luna ever the center of a conversation or a distrust between Mexico and the United States at the highest level?
Not to my recollection. I mean, when I arrived, I met him as one of the key partners that the United States had in this effort to fight organized crime. And we worked together in a lot of areas very smoothly. And he did a lot of clearly good things for professionalizing the federal police, hiring a lot of young graduates, increasing the ability to collect forensic material, having had a science unit. You remember the large data center that they set up.
Plataforma México.
That's right. And those were all promising. And so there was good cooperation. But there was more to be done, clearly. And in that sense, I think, to give the Calderon administration some credit, by the end of the administration, they had hit a cap in the violence, and it was heading down. And the level of homicides continued down until about the end of 2013, 2014. And I think that was in part because of the different policies that had been put in place by President Calderon and that team. And then, as you know, it bounced and has continued going up since, very sadly, for Mexico.
Yeah. And what did it cross your mind when you heard the news about García Luna being arrested on the charges of colluding with the drug cartels?
I shook my head and said, "Oh my goodness! This is somebody we were trusting, we were working with every day. Now everybody's innocent until they're proven guilty.
Mm-hmm. We'll see then,
and we'll see then. But this was a gentleman with whom we confided regularly, and we invested heavily in the federal police and in many of those initiatives that he undertook. The Merida Initiative helped pay for a number of those things, including some of the helicopters they had and a lot of the training that went on. And we saw the federal police as a very important partner. Now, we had other partners, as I mentioned. The Navy was a partner, the CSEN was a partner, the Army, they were partners also. And we tried to work with all of them and invest in all of them. But the goal, our goal really was to find the best way possible to bring under control this organized crime violence, both smuggling things to the United States, but we were very, very much hopeful that with stronger law enforcement and justice institutions, you could reduce the level of killing in Mexico.
That's good. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure, and all the best with this new enterprise.
Thank you very much. We will have it. Thank you.